Chapter 7 of A Narrative of the Life of Reverend Noah Davis, a Colored Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Brian Ness. A Narrative of the Life of Reverend Noah Davis, a Colored Man, by himself. Chapter 7. Account of a Visit to the Northern Cities, and True Friends. During the winter and spring I used every effort in my power in the way of collecting funds, but though I met with the most generous sympathy and kindness from all my friends, up to the 1st of June I had in hand only $150. I then applied to the Mission Board for permission to travel and solicit funds to help me out of my distress. This was readily granted me, having obtained a certificate relative to the objects of my journey, signed by Reverend Franklin Wilson, Secretary of our State Missionary Board, as well as by the pastors and other friends in Baltimore. I started once more on this painful business of begging money to purchase my 5th child out of slavery. I went to Philadelphia, and met with marked attention from the ministers of the Baptist churches generally, and especially from Reverend Messrs. McKean, Cole, and Griffith, with whom I had been acquainted in Baltimore, as well as Reverends Messrs. Cuthbert and Malcolm, and the editors of the Christian Chronicle, Presbyterian, etc. I obtained in this city nearly $200. With a view to meet a particular friend in Boston, I was induced to visit that city next. The many acts of kindness and sympathy I met with there can never be effaced from my memory. I had a special introduction to the Messrs. Gould and Lincoln, book publishers. To the latter I owe a lasting obligation. Through him I obtained a hearing of my case in Mr. Anderson's church, Roxbury, where I obtained very liberal aid, while the pastor was absent, as well as in many other cases. I called on Reverend Dr. Stowe, who allowed my case to be presented to his congregation at an evening meeting where I received some $50. He also gave me a letter of commendation to the other Baptist ministers, with a request that they would also sign it, which a large number did. The article was then published gratuitously for me in the Watchman and Reflector and Christian Era. Reverend L.A. Grimes, pastor of the 12th Baptist Church, colored, from the respectable position which he occupied in the community, did much for me in furthering my cause and introducing me to others, especially at the daily prayer meetings. I had the great privilege and pleasure of mingling with the people of God of every name in these blessed meetings. The first I went to was at the Old South Chapel. Here I felt at first greatly embarrassed when called on to speak or pray. I thought that those who came to these meetings must be among the most pious and intelligent people in Boston. The kind manner in which they treated me confirmed me in my impressions of them, but the best meetings I think I ever enjoyed on earth for such a length of time, nearly 2 months, was at what was called the North Street Prayer Meeting, or Father Mason's. This was in a large upper room. It really appeared to me that the most of those who met at this place each day at 12 o'clock to spend an hour in prayer, to tell what God had done for their souls, had been made ready by the Spirit of God before they reached that sacred spot. I know I shall fail to present a true picture of this heavenly place, for such it was to me and many others. But it may be that my own peculiar circumstances may have rendered the meeting unusually precious to me. But they were good to me in many respects. I was a poor colored man in distress, and needed Christian sympathy. I found it truly among the many white friends with whom I met in the North Street prayer meeting. There in that meeting the dear friends would pray with me and for me. In a word, I felt at times it was good for me to be afflicted, for surely, if it had not been for my peculiar circumstances, I should never have been inside the Old South Chapel or North Street prayer meeting, where I enjoyed so much of God's presence, and found so many real friends in the midst of strangers. I felt that I realized what the Apostle Peter meant. If need be, ye are in heaviness, through manifold temptation, that the trials of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. 1 Peter 1:6 and 7. Also, for I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. Acts 9:16. The arguments I drew from these passages of Scripture were, to show that when God wanted to purify our faith and strengthen our confidence in Him, He would send trials upon us, and to let us see how great the things we must suffer for His name's sake, and to let us see, too, how great the grace He gives us to enable us to endure hardness as good soldiers of the cross. Suffice it to say, the friends in Boston and its vicinity gave me about $400 towards the purchase of my daughter. I had the privilege of meeting the Baptist ministers in their conference meeting. Here the Reverend Mr. Tilson, pastor of the First Baptist Church at Hingham, invited me to spend a Sunday evening at his place, which I did, very greatly to my own satisfaction and profit. During my stay in Boston, I visited several of the smaller towns adjacent to it, Lynn, Cambridge, Melrose, Malden, Chelsea, and others, and I was kindly received at all of them. I collected in Lynn something like $50, the most of which was given to me by the members of the Second Baptist Church. Just before leaving Boston, to my great and agreeable surprise, I met Dr. F. Patton, surgeon in the U.S. Navy, my former owner, in the street in that city. I had not seen him for 7 or 8 years, and had no thought of seeing him in Boston. He recognized me first, and spoke to me before I knew he was near, but I instantly knew him. We greeted each other heartily, and he invited me to visit him at Chelsea. This I did, the same afternoon, and was kindly treated. While I sat there with him and his children, and he was looking over my subscription book, I was constrained to look back for 15 years over all the way the Lord had brought me, since the day this same gentleman had given me privilege to purchase my freedom, and handed me a pass, saying, "I am not afraid of you running away, Noah. You may go where you please." I reflected, suppose I had stayed away when I was in Boston, 12 years ago, begging money to buy myself. How would it be with me and my family today? But I have tried to acknowledge the Lord in all my ways, always asking counsel of Him, and I now feel that He has kindly directed and kept me. I also visited New Bedford, where I met a large number of my old acquaintances from Virginia, and had the privilege of presenting my object to several of the churches, and I received in all about $50. I next went to Providence, Rhode Island, where I spent a couple of weeks greatly to my advantage. It was indeed Providence to me. I was permitted to present my case to nearly all the Baptist churches in that city. 5 of these aided my cause, but their great kindness deserves some particular notice. The first one I visited was Reverend Mr. Stone's, whose congregation, with himself, greatly encouraged me. At the first church I told my story before an evening meeting, and shall never forget the kindness of the pastor, the senior deacon, and others. I obtained here nearly $100. I was kindly assisted by Reverend Mr. Kaiser's church, as also the Fourth Baptist Church, but at the Central Baptist Church, Reverend Mr. Fields, I found unbounded kindness and liberality. After seeing my letters of recommendation, the pastor invited me to his prayer meeting, where I was favored with the privilege of telling my story freely. I had been from home several months, and had collected in all about $700, but still lacked about $400 to accomplish my object. I was receiving letters every week from my church and family saying that my presence at home was greatly needed, but the idea of going home without accomplishing my great object filled me with distress. While speaking to the meeting and telling how God had delivered me from time to time out of trials, I felt such a sense of my condition that for the moment I could not restrain my feelings. My heart became so full that it stopped all utterance. At the close of the meeting, the people showed their sympathy for me by giving me a collection of $61. One dear brother, may the Lord bless him, came forward, and presenting me with a $10 bill, said, "Brother Davis, give yourself no more trouble about that daughter. You say you have to stop in New York. Let me say that when you get home, whatever you lack of the $400, write to me, and I will send you a check for the balance." This was spoken in the presence of the whole meeting. I felt completely at a loss for words of gratitude and thanksgiving, and merely said, "The day is broke, and the Lord has appeared for me indeed." I now left Providence, feeling in my heart that the place is rightly called by that name, as far as I am concerned. I then went to New York. In that great city I met with considerable assistance. I never started out, but it seemed that the Lord directed my steps. I was allowed to address a prayer meeting of the First Baptist Church, whose pastor was the late excellent Reverend A.K. Knott, and was aided to the amount of over $70. Reverend Dr. Lathrop, with much Christian kindness, invited me to his night meeting, but a severe rain prevented any attendance. He invited me again, and then he was absent because of illness. I was depressed with disappointment, but he had sent a request that I might be heard, as I afterward learned, and I was called on to state my case to the audience. I was taken by surprise, for the pastor's illness had taken all hope from me of accomplishing anything there. Still, I begun by telling my experience. I said that when it had pleased God to convert my soul, I thought that all my trouble was gone, and gone forever. But I had since learned that I was much mistaken. I had learned that in the world we shall have tribulation. I then went on to state my present trouble and distress, and before I left the meeting I received with heartfelt gratitude $134. This reminded me of Providence. Reverend Doctors Gillette and Armitage treated me with much generous sympathy, as also did many others. I visited Greenport on Long Island, where Reverend Henry Knapp kindly aided me. Elders Swan and Reed and the brethren generally at New London aided me to the amount of about $50. End of chapter 7. Recorded by Brian Ness.